All right, y'all. Sister and I are putting brakes, front brakes on my car. It's a 1995 Toyota Camry. You have to loosen that 12mm bolt for the brake line to just move the brake line a bit or let it be free. Then use a 14mm ratchet to loosen the slides, the slide bolts. On the top and the bottom, just loosen them a bit. On the top, loosen it a bit. The bottom one you're going to take off because you have to rotate this caliper up. Now she's going to loosen the bottom 14mm and remove it. This is the caliper torque plate, and this is the caliper. We're going to rotate that up. All right, y'all, we've taken a little piece of wood. It's just a stake that's about 18 inches long to prop up this caliper to get it out of the way so we can remove the brakes and hardware. We don't want to rotate this caliper all the way back because we don't want to kink the brake line. Sister's going to remove these keepers right now, these little pins.
You just kind of push them together and then they pull out.
We're going to remove the brakes now, but you want to take pictures so you know where they orient and where they're supposed to be. It helps you out. We're not going to take out the hardware because there's no reason to, y'all. We're going to clean that a little bit. It's going to be dusty and dirty. We're going to clean the rotor while it's exposed with a little denatured alcohol and paper towel. You don't want any grease on this rotor, y'all. So if you get your little hands on it while you're doing this job, make sure you clean it off. All right, y'all, we're just going to dab a little silicone on that hardware. Silicone lubricant spray. We apply it with a Q-tip. We just put in a container like that, spray it in, and apply it. These are the brakes I'm using. I got them from AutoZone. They're AutoZone Duralast, and the part number is M like Mary, K like King, D like Dog, 562. The brake without the little piece of hardware there goes to the outside of the car. The brake with the little piece of hardware goes to the inside of the car. All right, y'all, I'm going to put a little anti-squeal grease on this brake hardware right about here and right about here. The reason I'm not going to put it in the center is this is the cutout for the caliper, and if you put it in that area, it won't do any good. Just going to use a little bit there. And another little bit on this side. There you go, just a little bit. When you're working with these brakes, avoid touching the pad, the actual pad, with your fingers. Sister's going to put the brake pad in right now. So she's going to push in that part, that tang, and the one at the bottom, right in here, and right in here, and then rotate it in a little bit. There you go. It's just that easy. Don't be afraid of this stuff, y'all. Okay, so that's what she looks like on. That's how much grease is on it. And you see that this cutout for the caliper will go right down there where the grease isn't. You definitely don't put any grease, silicone spray, or anything on this rotor. That would be bad news. Your brakes won't work if there's grease on this rotor, y'all. All right, y'all, now she's going to take off the back pad. There you go. Sister's cleaning off the hardware for those brakes. Now she's going to put a little bit of silicone grease on those. All right, Sister's going to put that back brake on. pinched or pinched yourself. We're going to put the little hardware back on. Oops. And it goes right in those little holes right there. Those clips. All right, y'all, now comes the fun part. That right there is your piston. If your brakes are really worn, the pads are thin when you replace them. And I want to show you mine. Mine are not thin, they're relatively new. We're just doing a lot of work on the car, so I'm changing everything out. If these brake pads are really thin and worn, when you go to push this caliper back down, that piston is going to be sticking out quite a bit so it can reach those brake pads, right? So you've got to push that piston back in order to get the caliper to rotate back down on these brake pads. See how little this piston's out? If your brake pads are worn, it may be quite a bit out. So what we do, because we're a high-tech operation here, we take a little piece of wood and try to push it in. Ease it in a little bit at a time. You're not going to push and it goes in fast. It doesn't work like that. You just push it in a little bit at a time if you can. If just using a piece of wood to press against that piston to get it back so you can lower this caliper does not work, we use a piece of wood and a C-clamp. So the C-clamp would go like that, with a piece of wood in front of it, like that. So the wood goes against the piston, and the clamp goes against the wood. Then you start tightening. Now, here's what you have to be concerned about. That's the brake reservoir on my car. If your brake reservoir is at maximum, and your brakes are really worn, and you have to push in that piston a good distance, the pressure in the system will cause the brake fluid to start to rise in that reservoir. So, here's what you want to do. We already have our cap released. You pull the cap off and put it on there, just gently. Don't secure it back in place or squish it back down. Just take it off and set it on top, so if there's pressure, it can get out. You'll need to get like a turkey baster and a little container and take some of that brake fluid out as it starts to rise so it doesn't come over the reservoir and get all over your engine. So as you're pushing in that piston, you come over here and check your reservoir and see how the fluid is rising. If it starts to rise above the max level, that's when you start taking the fluid out. We're going to start compressing that piston now. We're just taking a little piece of wood and pressing it back. Slow, even pressure on that.
Very firm.
Yep, very firm pressure on that piston to try to move it back. If it doesn't work, use a C-clamp and a piece of wood.
Kind of looks like it's moving a little. So we're going to know by trying.
We're going to see if we move that piston back enough. We're going to put that caliper on, or try to put the caliper on. I don't think so. I can see it hitting over here.
So that's too hard on my fingers, so it's going to be the C-clamp.
All right, we have failed at pressing it back with wood, so we're going to use the C-clamp. Stand by. All right, y'all. We have the C-clamp on it to get it moved back. That's how you position the C-clamp on the back of that caliper. You put a piece of wood to the front like that. The wood is up against the piston. And Sister's going to start tightening that C-clamp so we can compress that piston and get her in and get that caliper on those brake pads.
So ever so slowly. No need to rush it.
So she's just tightening that C-clamp a little bit at a time. And again, check your reservoir to make sure it's not going above the max line or coming out. Now we're going to give it a go and see if we pushed it in enough. Try to get that caliper on.
She's going to have more compression.
Okay, we're going to compress that piston a little more.
I can't see it on that side.
Let's see it. A little more. I think that's good. Let's try that. We're going to try it now again. The name of the game with the C-clamp is you tighten a little bit at a time, y'all, and there she's going on. See, just a little bit at a time. You don't want to tighten it too much or push it down too much, that piston, if you don't have to. Sister's putting the lower 14mm bolt in. We're going to put the 12mm bolt back on the brake line right there. We've tightened the 12mm bolt for the brake line with a ratchet. Now we're going to torque that bolt to 21 foot-pounds. All right, y'all, we're going to torque the top slider bolt to 20 foot-pounds and the lower slider bolt to 14 foot-pounds. We're going to put a 19mm open wrench right here to keep that stationary and tighten the back 14mm bolt with a torque wrench. Torquing to 14 foot-pounds on the lower slider bolt. After you finish your brake job, check your fluid reservoir, make sure it's at max, and secure the lid back on. Put that lid back on. And that's how we replace front brakes on a 1995 Toyota Camry. Hope it helps, and happy DIYing.